Thank you, Erika. It's a pleasure to be back in this forum. Well, there is an intimate connection between the kind of education that we impart and our society. We can see this by looking at what we have achieved in education in the 20th century. We have generated an enormous amount of knowledge and expertise in almost every field. And all this expertise has solved many of the problems which we were facing at the beginning of the 20th century. Problems of healthcare, epidemics, natural disasters, transportation, communication, and so on. So in every field, also agriculture, architecture, in every field, there has been tremendous progress. And the way we are living now is entirely different from the way we were living in the beginning of the 20th century. So you can see the influence of the education that we give, including the research that we do, and so on, the whole system, on the state of our society. What I want to consider today is whether the same kind of education will resolve the problems which we are facing today in modern society. Or we need to change direction and have a different kind of education. Because it seems to me that we are just going on in the same direction because that's what we have learned to do. And we are not really inquiring whether that same kind of education which has solved our problems so far will be able to solve the problems which we are facing today. So that's what I want to examine in this talk. Now, what are the challenges that we are facing in modern society today? I'll enumerate what to my mind are these challenges, and we will consider whether they can get resolved with the same kind of education that we have imparted. First and foremost, the fact that every human being is identified with a particular group, either a national group or religious group or ideological group or political group, and works primarily for the welfare of his group and treats the other groups as competitors or rivals. At the worst level, this has led to wars, riots, terrorism, and so on. The problem arises because the mind divides people as my people and other people. So that's a psychological problem. It arises out of this identification. Nationalism is promoted in our education, and it divides the mind. There is no such division on the earth, actually. Science tells us it is all one globe on which we are living. But we have divided it into nations and we identify ourselves with our particular nation, a particular culture, a particular religion, and so on, and feel divided from other human beings who similarly identify with other religions, other cultures, other nationalities. And this division has been the cause of so much violence and destruction. Our whole history for the last 3,000 years is the history of wars. It used to be kings who fought those wars. Then it was ideological and religious groups which fought those wars. And we are still at war. So we haven't been able to solve this problem of humanity, global problem of humanity, which makes for insecurity for all of us. And is the greatest curse because every nation is spending more than half its revenue in just maintaining an army, navy, and air force, and producing all these weapons of destruction and so on, which don't contribute at all to the economy and are a drain on the economy of every country, simply because we are not able to solve this problem. Now, this problem is not the creation of the illiterate villagers in India or Brazil or Argentina or the uneducated man. They are the creation of highly educated people like you and me, MSCs, PhDs, LLBs, who become presidents, who become diplomats, who become scientists, to support this whole machinery of war, and whose minds have this division. So apparently this kind of education not able to solve this problem. In fact, it is contributing to the continuation of this problem. And the second major challenge is that on the one hand, we have had so much progress in science and technology, which I mentioned, that it has changed our life drastically and provided us with so many comforts and abilities which we have access to. But it has also released considerable amount of power in the hands of man. And when power is not coupled with wisdom, it's used destructively. So we have to ask this question, whether our education at present in imparting knowledge is also creating wisdom in the mind of the people. Otherwise, we are empowering them. I think we'll close this. Yeah. We are empowering them, but we are not providing the wisdom to use that power rightly, because human beings have not really understood their right relationship with power. Is power meant to dominate, to threaten, to occupy other lands, and so on? Or is it meant to protect, to do justice, to be kind? That is what the human mind decides. And the human mind does not have love and compassion in it. It has all these division, suspicions, distrust, hatred of other groups, and so on. So we have psychological warfare going on all the time, and from time to time it erupts in the form of a war. And this goes on repeatedly. We have created the United Nations, and before that, the League of Nations. They try to become active as soon as a war situation develops and make some sort of agreement between the two parties to avoid the physical manifestation of the war. But they are not able to address the psychological warfare, and therefore these agreements keep breaking down, and repeatedly we are having wars. So will our present education solve this problem? It's a major problem. In fact, the scientists are now saying, and I am quoting from Einstein, who said, I don't know where the Third World War will begin and how it will be fought. But I know how the Fourth World War will be fought. It will be fought again with bows and arrows, which means all civilization will get destroyed if we have a Third World War. But we are living constantly under this danger. Why? Why are we not able to solve this problem when we are so intelligent in so many other respects? Because we have cultivated through education that kind of intelligence of thought and skill, but not the intelligence that has love and compassion and what we call wisdom. And knowledge without wisdom becomes a great danger. Madame Blavatsky in The Secret Doctrine quoted a small poem which refers to this difference between knowledge and wisdom. She said, knowledge and wisdom, far from being one, oft times have no connection. Knowledge dwells in minds replete with the thoughts of others. Wisdom in those attentive to their own. Knowledge is proud that it knows so much. Wisdom is humble that it knows no more. So knowledge and intellectual development does not in itself bring about wisdom. And that was the motto of the Theosophical Society. Theosophical Society or Theosophy was supposed to be the wisdom religion. So that in this quest for truth, you come upon a deeper understanding of yourself and your relationships to society and to other human beings and nature and everything. What was called self-knowledge. But our education has not taken up that responsibility. It has taken up only the responsibility of training individuals to have a career and to earn, and for the economic development of the country. The emphasis is all the time on economy. The emphasis is not on goodness or compassion or love. So the very knowledge that science has generated has also become a danger. War is far more dangerous today than it was 1,000 years ago. 1,000,000 times more dangerous, because with a single bomb, you can destroy a whole country. With that kind of ability, and without this was wisdom, there is a lopsided development of the human mind. And that is responsible for most of our major problems in society today. The third set of problems are what we are reading every day in our newspapers and magazines, as the ecological catastrophe is facing us. Things like global warming, depletion of the ozone layer, the pollution of the air and the water, the problems due to the plastics, use of plastics and so on. And the fact that thousands of species are dying so that the ecological balance that is there, has been there for millions of years in nature is now being disturbed by what we call progress. The global warming, scientists are, ecologists are saying, has already reached a point of no return. And you are having these Arctic ice caps and so on melting. And you will have severe devastation in future. But we are not able to reverse that trend. We are stuck with it. So that's another very major problem facing us, which has been generated by knowledge and progress in science. It has changed our relationship with nature. Human beings were part of nature, used to worship nature, used to worship a tree, an animal, a river, and so on. We were part of nature. But after the Industrial Revolution, the whole attitude changed, and nature was looked upon as a resource for economic development. And with the competition between nations to be the first to get the largest share of the cake, the destruction just kept mounting. And it is now come to the point where it is threatening our existence on this planet. We have been more destructive than any other species, not only of nature, but even of our own species. And yet we consider ourselves extremely intelligent because we can make computers or fast aeroplanes and so on. We have to question whether we are really intelligent or we have defined intelligence itself unintelligent. Krishnamurti said, there is no intelligence without compassion. Because it's not intelligence, it becomes something destructive. And when it's associated with compassion, then it turns into wisdom. The fourth major problem that I see is the fact that many governments, even today, are dictatorships. And dictatorships are a great danger because our history shows that the greatest crimes against humanity have been committed under dictatorships. The Nazi dictatorship, the Soviet communist dictatorship, and now the Chinese dictatorship, and several military dictatorships also, what is going on today in Myanmar and so on. So dictatorships are a great danger. And dictatorship is an attitude of mind which has been cultivated by our education. We make a hero of anybody who can be very smart with knowledge or with thought or with techniques and so on. We admire that person. And we promote this kind of thing. And that person starts having an inflated ego and thinking that he is so intelligent, he can dictate to everybody else how to live. But he doesn't have love and compassion. I mean, Hitler had great abilities as a commander. That's how he rose that high. What he lacked was love and compassion. So what is there in our present day education to ensure that when we are giving knowledge and empowering the individual, he will also have love and compassion? I'm afraid nothing. And it becomes extremely irresponsible to generate power in the hands of an individual without caring whether he has wisdom or not. Because the difference between our concept of God and our concept of the devil is not one of power. The devil is infinitely powerful and so is God. Of course, they are both concepts, but there are human beings who imitate those concepts. The difference is that the devil has no love and compassion. He is self-centered, egoistic. Whereas God has love, compassion, non-violence, justice in his consciousness. So what is there in our education to ensure that you are producing godly people and not devilish people? Are the scientists whom we admire so much, who have produced germ warfare, perhaps even the present pandemic, are they to be admired as heroes? Or they are like devils with tremendous ability, but misused for doing cruelty, perpetrating cruelty. So that's a major problem. Now, democracy is not just the form of democracy. In most of our democratic countries, we have the form of democracy, which means the separation of the executive and the judiciary, holding elections every 4 or 5 years, periodically, to elect a parliament, having political parties which sit in the parliament to have a discussion on what policies should be done, and so on. Freedom of the press, all that is the form. These are the pillars of what we call democracy. But we don't have the spirit of democracy. The spirit of democracy is the spirit of humility, which says we are all interested in the welfare of our people and our country, but none of us really knows what is the best way to organize things and go forward. So let us sit down, discuss with each other the issues facing our country, and listen to each other with respect like friends, thereby educating ourselves in the issues that are facing our nation. Having done that, we shall then invite proposals on what decisions should be taken. And if there are more than one proposal, we shall vote and go with the majority view. But once we have accepted the majority view, everybody will contribute towards that. Not that only the party in power will contribute to that, all the other parties will also contribute because we believe in this process. And by this process, we have arrived at a common decision. So the opposition are not really enemies. They are friends with a difference of opinion. And friends means they will support what we have decided to do jointly. That's the spirit of cooperation. Not competition, rivalry, and saying, you didn't agree with what I said, so let me see how you manage things and so on. That's competition, rivalry, completely different from the spirit of cooperation. And democracy is essentially a cooperative function. So the spirit of democracy is not there in any of the democracies of the world today. And that's why democracy doesn't function as well as it can if the spirit of democracy was also there. The form is always hollow when the spirit is not there behind it. So that's something to think about. Can education create the spirit of democracy in the individual, so that when you come to power and when you hold an office, your mind is democratic. It is really listening to other colleagues and so on and taking decisions intelligently and cooperatively with all, not like a dictator feeling that whatever I think is an absolute right and I will impose it on all the others. So democracy as a value needs to be cultivated in education. Otherwise, the smart people tend to become dictators and dominate over the rest of the population, feeling that they are superior to the others. The next set of problems I would like to mention is the breakdown of cooperation between man and woman in the institution of marriage. In many of the countries, particularly the advanced countries, the divorce rates have crossed 50%. That means more divorces are taking place than marriages. Now, marriage is a man-made institution. And the purpose of that institution was essentially to discharge our responsibility towards the next generation. Nobody has found a better way of doing that than bringing up a child in a home created by the two people who are responsible for producing that child. Because that child needs to be looked after for 20 years. It's not like with animals that in 3 or 6 months, the young one becomes independent of the parents. So the family was constituted for that reason. And when this cooperation between man and woman breaks down, the people who suffer are the children, because they feel extremely insecure when their parents quarrel and are not able to provide a secure home for them to grow in. And this has all kinds of psychological problems and complexes and fear and suspicion and violence and so on, which you see. We see the violence happening in the younger generation, in the adolescents and so on. Because Madame Montessori pointed that out. She said, when a child grows up without love and compassion, he becomes his own worst enemy. Something we have to really give thought to. So that's another major problem. I'm not saying that there should be no divorce, that the old system of man dominating over woman and woman having to work like an assistant to the man was a better system. No, that was an unjust arrangement. But when from that you want to go to a just arrangement, which is that of friendship as equals, then you need this spirit of cooperation, which unfortunately is not there. So the ego problems come up and the division comes up until the two people are not able to really live peacefully with each other. And then, of course, it becomes better to separate rather than to continue to fight inside a home. But the person who is innocent, who is affected, is the next generation for whom this whole institution was made. Unless we can find an alternative way of discharging that responsibility towards the younger generation, you have to continue with this family arrangement. The Russians tried that. They tried to destroy the family by saying the children will all belong to the state and the state will look after the children. It didn't work. Children don't relate to just food and so on, where there is no sense of belonging. So it very soon collapsed and they had to give up that experiment that has been tried. So that's one of the problems. And last but not the least, I think a major problem in modern society and has been there with us also from ancient times is the fact that society tends to replicate itself. So that our problems go from generation to generation and don't end. Somebody introduced casteism in India 3,000 years ago. We don't even know why it was introduced and what was the real form and purpose of it. But it's continuing. Today, it has become discriminatory. It has become brought division among the people within the country, even among the religion, within the religion. So, how to get rid of it? The government tries to make rules to get rid of it. But the mind of the child is infected with casteism. They don't eat with each other, they don't marry each other, and so on. So it becomes separatist groups. There are riots between caste people and so on. Discrimination. So this problem needs to be addressed. It's a psychological problem. And it has very severe physical consequences. It leads to poverty, it leads to division, cruelty, and all that, domination. Look at the problem in the Middle East. The Arabs and the Jews, whatever be the reasons, they hate each other. So the parents tell the children, the Jewish parents tell the children, Arabs are our enemies, be careful. And the Arabs tell that Jews are our enemies, be careful. So the old people die and the younger generation is infected with the same kind of thinking, the same kind of division. And so it persists from generation to generation. It grows, the hatred continues from generation to generation. That's what I mean by the inertia or the replication of society. So our problems don't end. And that's a very serious problem. Now, the only way it can end is if you create an inquiring mind, not a conforming mind, an obeying mind, which is accepting whatever the elders are telling, but a mind that is questioning it, doubting it, which the elders don't like, because you don't want your son to come and ask you about your habits and why do you smoke and why do you eat meat and so on. You don't want that. So you say, shut up, mind your own business. It's my life, and so on. So it continues as tradition. So nothing changes. In tradition, men have dominated over women traditionally in all societies, in the Islamic, in the Christian, in the Hindu, everywhere. And it has been accepted, even the women accepted their inferior position. So a very unjust kind of arrangement can continue from year to year, from generation to generation. We have seen that. Therefore, you must, through education, create not a conforming mind, but an inquiring mind, questioning mind. Without inquiring and questioning, you will never come upon what is the truth and what is the right action. You will just imitate and continue the past. And the past is terrible. All this hatred and domination and discrimination and hierarchy is terrible. And that state continues. Because it continues in our mind, therefore it continues also in our society. And it's education that addresses the mind. Therefore, only education can really take on the responsibility of creating a new mind. And that is what Krishnamurti wanted to do. Annie Besant in 1925 said to him, "You are the world teacher, therefore you should take charge of education." And immediately he took charge of education and he ordered 400 acres of land in South India and 400 acres of land on the banks of the Ganges. That is how Rishi Valley and Rajghat were created. He wanted a residential school so that you can have an integrated development of the child. Be responsible, education should be responsible, not only for the intellectual development, but also the emotional development, the physical development, and the relationship of the human being, wisdom, the creation of wisdom. So you cannot teach wisdom, but you can plant this inquiry in the mind, put the questions in the mind of it. After all, that's what we do in science. And science has progressed so much because we have created an inquiring mind in science. If we took it up in education, we can create an inquiring mind also in social affairs and in self-knowledge, in our own, questioning what is boredom? What is really love? Is love the same thing as attachment? Is friendship support and agreement? So there are all these deeper questions, and those questions are never discussed with the children in the present day education. So all these problems, which are major problems which we are affecting our life in society today, are there, and we still think we are extremely intelligent, but our intelligence is not able to solve these problems. So Krishnamurti talked about the fact that education must take the responsibility for the transformation of consciousness. So long as we continue with the same kind of consciousness, that consciousness determines the way we relate with everything around us. And it is millions of such relationships which constitute society. So society is not independent of the state of our consciousness. And it is only education which can transform the state of our consciousness. We'll go into it in greater detail in the next talk on next Saturday. But I think I'll end it here for today, and we can have some discussion.